Hi, this is Amanda.
And this is Jen.
And you're listening to Just This, a podcast that explores everything around being and becoming a mother or parent.
We're excited to have you join us as we dive into the practical details as well as the unseen energetics on topics that span from preconception to years after birth.
Yay, boundaries and desires. I like this because you were talking about me and like my lack of desires. So I was like, we need to talk about your boundaries. So we like kind of combine them and
Well, my boundaries?
Yeah.
So starting off high.
I mean, because you kind of came across, like the situation came up recently where you're like, do I feel comfortable with this or do I not?
Yeah, and I had to poll some people in the birth work world of should I do this or should I not?
Yeah. And that's where
are my boundaries?
Yeah, where do your boundaries lie?
What would your boundaries be? I'm not really sure what mine are.
And then you were asking me if I wanted tea or coffee, and I'm like,
yeah,
I don't care.
What kind of tea do you want? Well, whatever. Do you want coffee? It doesn't matter. I'm like, do you want a drink? Do you have? What is your desire? I'm not here to choose this for you.
So this is how the topic of boundaries and desire came up.
Yeah.
I like it's collaborative effort, and we're here in person too, which is exciting.
We're here in person. Yeah, we'll release this other one we just did before. We just finished talking about time and structure, and we're like, okay, let's just jump into the boundaries. Everything's pointing to boundaries and desires.
So what were you thinking when you said desires? Like what came up for you?
Well, boundaries and desires around parenting is very important.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. I just want to say first that one thing I noticed about postpartum especially is like you really, as a mom or parent, your desires get totally dismissed for at least, I don't know, how long would you say? 6 weeks, 3 months? I don't know. Like there's that first week especially, like you don't have,
I want to pull this back to pre-pregnancy.
Okay, let's do it.
Because I feel if you can practice and lean into awareness around boundaries and desires before you're even pregnant, that is going to set you up for success when you do hit postpartum, but also all throughout your pregnancy. Yes. So I would love to pull it back there because from a personal standpoint, I actually had this whole discussion when there was even the thought about potentially having a child come into our reality with my partner. And we had a huge discussion around what our boundaries and desires were around that whole scenario. And I, in retrospect, was like, holy fuck, that was such a good thing to do. Why doesn't everyone have this?
It's interesting you say that because after we had Eli, I was like, why don't people talk about their parenting styles? And that's basically like their desires and boundaries, essentially.
That parenting styles, and even just like, what do I see life with a child look like? What do I desire that to be like for me? Because what came out of that conversation is we actually had very different desires of what it would look like. And therefore, we had to make sure we were okay with finding a balance between that.
Right.
And would that be, it was and if things should change, what would that look like? I thought that was a very great thing to do. And some people...
Prenuptial baby agreement.
Baby agreement. But it was just a very good, healthy conversation to have because we were both very grounded in knowing life is life. And while we love each other, I just thought it was such a beautiful thing to do.
I am curious how that... I mean, you've worked with kids, so you have, I think, a better understanding of what reality looks like to some extent with having a child. But for those listeners out there that don't necessarily have the reality of parenting or working with kids, how would that play out?
It was more of, it wasn't, I'm not even down to the practical detail, but for example, just to pull in some of the things, like I want my child to be out of the country 3 to 4 months of the year.
Right.
Doesn't even have to be the practical details, but when you think about having a child, if that is in your thought plan, which it probably is if you're listening to this podcast, at least, then you have some idea. You do have some idea of what you want to come out of that, right, or where you see it going.
Absolutely.
And I think it's interesting that people don't actually discuss.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's like, oh yeah, let's have a baby.
Right.
But they don't ever say like, well, this is what I think of when I have a baby, and this is what I think of, you know, I want to live on a farm and like do this. And it's like, oh, I actually want to, you know, live in New York City and have my child involved in all these things. Where we all, again.
It's a great point, because I remember when I remember I had kind of an image of what it would look like when I had a kid. And definitely included was like travel. Like I was like, oh yeah, they're babies, just get them used to traveling. But my ex was like, no, we're not traveling on an airplane with a baby. No, what if he cries? His whole scenario was definitely not traveling. Had we had that conversation beforehand, it probably would have helped out a lot. So yeah, and that's just like one little facet of life, right?
Yeah.
But it is interesting because we didn't have that conversation. And in my head, yeah, babies are easy to travel with, especially young, not like crawling and walking in the toddler stages. Not that you can't travel with them, but and then he was just like, no, he didn't really want to travel with a kid. Like he just found it overwhelming in his mind. But I didn't know that until he was older. So
yeah, it's a good. So if you start this conversation, if you start leaning into the desires and also your boundaries, because that's going to come up with the desires, because if somebody has a desire that crosses a boundary of yours, you're obviously going to have to discuss that. Starting it early is great. I also, touching on the manifestation part, believe these conversations, well, some people might say, oh, speaking to what would happen if you separate or this or that, can breathe life into that reality. I actually believe they ground you into manifesting like a deeper, not necessarily that scenario, but actually connecting you further. It's kind of a weird reverse thing that it's like when you're so empowered with the connection of going in these spaces that even if it doesn't seem like it could ever potentially happen. And that was the other thing. We were both, okay, maybe we'll have a kid, maybe we won't. And this is what it would look like if we did, if we did.
Yeah.
It just came about in a conversation because we were like, oh, maybe it'll happen.
Yeah.
And this was what we want. So it was a non-conscious conversation at first, but in retrospect, I'm like, this is actually a really great practice that people should put into play.
Absolutely. And going back to the manifesting, yes, you knew what I was going to say. The manifesting, I think
I know everything.
Like it's on there. The manifesting part of it, like the whole having that conversation of what would happen if it went the direction you didn't. I think there's a difference when you are putting a lot of attention and energy behind it. So when those things come up, say you didn't have that conversation, or when you did, it's probably not heightened with a ton of emotions because you're just talking about it.
You're not in it. Yes.
You're not in it, as opposed to 1 to 5 years down the line and you're emotionally in it. So now the things that you don't want are already heightened into manifesting. Are you agreeing? It seems like you're
totally agreeing.
You have a huge smile on your face.
I'm totally agreeing. And it's going back to the postpartum now. Fast forward.
Like we wind.
Yeah. I always recommend for people in postpartum. I think everyone should do this, and it's part of in that communication course that I'm created, that you eventually first month, whatever, you're just learning.
You're in the ditches.
But once you get to 6 weeks and beyond, I always recommend a weekly check-in.
Yeah.
Back to time and schedule that you put as a part of your weekly rhythm.
Yeah.
And generally, I just tell people do it during when you're making breakfast one morning, or do it when you're on a walk, but actually put it on the calendar in the sense of we're doing it on Monday morning or we're doing it on Monday night. And because just around what you said, I actually have these outlined points that usually it's like 4 things that you cover and communicating. And it's a great space to communicate in reflection of the last week and looking forward at the next week, what your desires are, what your boundaries were that came up, or maybe like a readjustment of your boundaries, all of these things in an uncharged space. Because when you're in the moment, which we can be so often, or in postpartum, we just don't talk about it, and then trigger.
Right.
Versus if we have a set aside time every week where we're just actually reflecting and having a discussion, these things can be smoothed out and aired out versus the pot boiling and then explosions.
Totally. And I think too, like the whole pot boiling aspect of postpartum, I don't think it's intentional, obviously. No. It's just that you're so busy and tired that it's just like, that's how it goes down.
Was the worst. We were talking, Jen asked me when we were talking about potentially talking about this topic. She goes, how were you at communicating your desires? I go, well, Jen, I was very good at it, but I wouldn't say I was the nicest person. I was very good at communicating my desires. And Ben probably thought he was going to have his head on a block every week.
Oh, man.
I even felt, this is where also give yourself grace, because hormones and sleep deprivation are a real thing.
Yes.
I was very fully aware that I was a Jekyll and Hyde. Like at night, I would just say things, and the next day I was like, oh my God, I'm so sorry, but I just couldn't help myself, and I was so tired and so exhausted. Yeah.
Well, and I prompted this question because I feel that there's a lot of moms that are bad at asking for help or asking what they need and getting those desires met.
I was good at communicating my desires with my partner, and not good. I communicated them, but I was bad at asking others to support me, and that was where there was a big issue.
Yeah, and I think it's so, like, it kind of makes me wonder where that came from, like why we're afraid to ask for help. And it's interesting because now that I'm a single mom, I've really had to, like, really extend out and ask people for help, because you just can't do it on your own. I mean, you can, but you really can't. Like, it's a community. And especially studying to be a midwife, there's no way I can do it on my own. I need help. And so learning how to ask for help was a huge thing I had to, like, just confront head on. And I remember having a conversation with you about that too. And you're like, just if they offer, that means they're offering, and you can accept their offer. When I asked, like, for help, or when they offered it without me even asking for help, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I want to lean into also, this came up recently, nothing related to child actually, where someone in the past few months had said to me, just ask for help. And I was in a state where I literally was like, I don't know even what I need help with right now. And thinking back, that is very much a thing where you could be in a state where what help do I ask for?
Right.
So in that state, I actually, in the moment and reflection of that, I was aware that what I needed wasn't help. There's this concept I heard of recently, I'll link this in the show notes, called Via Negativa.
Okay. I like the name.
Oh,
Via
yeah.
Negativa.
It's another podcast episode I can link, and it's very interesting, but it's a concept that's been around forever. It's Latin, of removing things to improve. And this is where boundaries come in. So maybe it's not as much asking for desires. When you're in a situation where you're like, I don't even know what to ask for help, maybe it's more of you need to say no, and you need to create that more boundaries. And that's what actually I think ultimately it was both in my postpartum state, but I jumped into work too fast, working for myself, because baby was sleeping all the time. Right. You don't know the future until you've lived it, and hit that sleep deprivation moment where I needed to say to the people I was working with, I actually will not be working in the morning between these hours and these hours, because I'm going to be sleeping, because I've been up all night feeding my baby.
Right.
All these different things that come up where I needed to set some boundaries with other people.
Yes.
More than asking for help.
Got it. Yeah.
So there's a good distinction too, is when is it that you need to set a boundary versus when is it that you need to ask for help.
Right.
And if you find yourself in a place of thinking, I don't know what I need help with, then potentially what you need is some via negativa.
Yeah.
Some removing and boundaries in order to protect the energy.
Yeah, I like it. I really like it. It's interesting. I heard this, like, going back to that relationship check-in and kind of touching on this, like, via negativity.
Via negativa.
Via negativa.
Yeah.
Gotta put the A on it. Was that their way of checking in with their partner was, like, what, like, when they got home, like, what are you operating at? Like, your percentage. Like, if each person had 100% battery, what are you operating at? And then say you're operating at 80 and I'm, like, operating at 20. At that point, you'd have to have a sit down and, like, a real conversation. How are we going to get through this week or even the rest of this night when we're both operating below our functioning level? But say you come in, you're like, oh, I'm at 100 or 110 or whatever. And I'm like, oh, I'm floating at, like, 30. Then it's like you have that extra ability to kind of
Yeah. I want to meet the parents where at the end of the day, especially in the first year, either parent is above 50. Please, if you are out there, reach out to me and tell me your secret. Yes.
So going back.
Whatever. And I love that because it just shows another example of it's important to just, there's examples out there and we can link to some examples or I can give some examples in the show notes. However, making it your own.
Yeah. And I think the point of that was like basically checking in with your own boundary of like where you're at and what you need and what your desire is to get to.
And putting even another spin on this, I was speaking with a friend and everyone has different communication styles. This couple, what worked better for them was doing a Google Doc, and then this would never maybe work for me. But there's people out there with different neurodivergent, approaches, and maybe communication styles are different across the board. Mm-hmm. And coming up what's going to work for you and your partner is a beautiful way also of deepening that connection and figuring out what's going to work. They had a Google Doc, and the one person would write on the Google Doc their responses or how they felt about a situation, and then the other person would comment on it.
It's just like a personal Facebook.
Yeah, but I mean, it was a nice way for them. This actually was, I think, about a charged situation, and they had to like create some space between it. However, I also know that the communication style that they choose to communicate in is generally a little bit different from maybe what, two people sitting down and just having a conversation. So make it your own is what I want to get back at. Yeah. Make it your own. Find a way that's going to work for you and whoever you're, co-parenting with, and
to set those boundaries.
Yeah, set the boundaries and express the desires.
And express the desires of what you want. Yeah, through Google. That's great.
Through Google, Google Docs.
Yay, I mean, it makes
Google.
sense. Makes sense because
just do it with ChatGPT. You can sit there at night. Do your ChatGPT.
What should I say, Google?
Yeah. Yeah, just make it your own. Find whatever. I just wanted to throw out another example of something that, for me, I would have never come up with because it's not my preferred form of communication.
Yeah.
However,
it worked.
It was creative and it worked for this couple.
For them.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think too, talking about going to boundaries and desires, I think also too we should talk about boundaries and desires with our kids, especially.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right, we can jam on that for a little bit.
Yeah. And I always find it interesting because like when I see babies born, it's always like this moment where I'm like, oh, they're so loved and perfect and cute and great. And it's interesting to me at one point, there's like this shift in life where we kind of like shift away from this really unconditional love where we begin to like start to feel frustrated with them and we have like desires for them and we have to start putting boundaries for them. Some parents do that earlier, obviously, than other parents. But when did you kind of start laying boundaries and for Penelope, and did you have desires for her?
Yeah, who doesn't? The one thing with boundaries that I was prompted about early on and I really like is I was told that the NLP approach for children is better. And if you're not familiar with neuro-linguistic programming, the idea is to change the way you're saying something and or thinking the words or thoughts in your head that will actually shift your energy to go in a direction that's more toward your desire. So desire and boundary are very married because we set boundaries, obviously, because we have certain desires, even if it's as simple as don't run in the street.
Right.
But again, with neuro-linguistic programming, the whole point is don't use don't, right? Use words that are in the positive framework because our subconscious, when we say don't think of a blue pen, we think of a blue pen. In order to know the not part of something, we have to think of what it is we don't want or not to do or whatever. So to always frame things in the positive. And we tried to adapt that early on. And I remember we explained this to friends that would be on longer trips with us. And they were like, wow, this is actually very hard because we are so trained in our societies. Don't do this, like blah, blah, blah. So when you actually have to catch yourself thinking, this is how we blah, blah, blah. We do this so that X, Y, Z. That's how we tried to start setting boundaries. We're not perfect at it, but it seems to work. And I think for children, it's more of and Andrea Olson, going back to elimination communication, I think her approach is very similar, of more of, even when we talk like simply about pottying, we sit on the potty because blah, 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 or we go to the potty when we get home because blah, blah, blah. Right. Just kind of more of, this is like what we do, you know, and just modeling and saying, this is how it works in the world. This is what we do. This is why we do it. Kids, as they get older, why? But you just start telling them from the beginning. It's we're not setting rules. It's just, it's no. And I also like to honor that with desires once your kids start talking. And I mean, it's hard. We can't give our kids everything they want, but I do try to avoid just squashing everything that comes at me with a no.
With a no.
Or, you know, for example, as kids get older, they want this, they want that, and I say, great, we're gonna add that to the list. You know, it's like there is a never-ending list we have right now, but it's not a no. It's just a not right now, and I don't even want to say not right now. It's just okay, we'll put that on the list for later. Kind of thing. So I don't know.
I like it, and I've used it to some extent. We were not opposed to using the word no, but we definitely did like a lot of redirecting and try to use more positive feedback. But I find personally that I'm not opposed to using the word no with kids, because it's going to happen in life. They're going to be told no. Going back to what we were talking about, like in the boundaries section of things, is like saying no is just as important as saying yes. But are we over saying no? Like you said, like, is it constantly, no, don't run in the street. No, don't do that. No. Is it too much? And can we pull back and kind of have a balance where we teach them a healthy, like, yeah, you have every right to say no to me just as much as I have a right to say no to you, as long as it's not like that consistency.
And I think both of us are very, very self-aware. We're so self-aware here. No, both of us have expressed moments with our children where we are not perfect, and we've actually then reflected to our child, hey, I am feeling this way, stating we're not perfect, like things happen, and you know, reflecting on that with our child of, I'm feeling this way, this is what I'm desiring right now, you know, even if we're in a frustrated state, like when I'm in a frustrated state sometimes, instead of being like blah 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 blah, just like, I am feeling really frustrated and this is what I need right now, you know. It's just
boundaries, needs, or desires.
Because that's what I want my child to do. Ultimately, I don't want my child to explode and have a tantrum. I want them to be like, I am feeling very sad because Jimmy took my ice cream and I need a hug, or I need to go to my room.
Right.
And even now, my 4/ almost, you know, going on 14-year-old child sometimes will come in, state her feelings, stomp upstairs, I need to go to my room, and slam the door. It's like, okay, well, you were very clear on stating your needs and boundaries. I need to go to my room. Don't follow me.
Don't follow me.
It's like, there's some desires and boundaries being stated right there.
Well, and it's good, too, because it teaches them that those boundaries are respected. And that way, when they go out and build relationships later in life, especially during the teenage years, and start making friends, they've already developed this like really strong sense of like boundaries and desires. And even if they aren't met with friends, they will they have that foundation in place. And I think that's so great. I love it.
Yeah. So modeling as much as you can your own. And again, we're not perfect parents. We've all yelled at our kids. We've fought in front of them, and just being able to say, even if it's the next day, you know, this, I'm sorry, or you don't even need to say I'm sorry. Like, this is how I was feeling. This was, you know, it crossed my boundary in this way, or I was desiring X, Y, Z. And being able to reflect on it even a day later is still modeling to your child that you're recognizing and bringing awareness to your feelings and actions.
Yeah, and too, when you recognize things that are upsetting you, in a way you're recognizing that that you're
something's out of there's a balance or desire that's out of balance.
Yep, exactly, and then you can address it like head on there. Yeah. I think it's interesting too. I've had a friend that she had like no boundaries with her kids. Like, kids like boundaries, and they said they like boundaries because they feel comfortable in knowing that if they cross the boundary, that they're almost okay with the punishment or the consequence that happens because they've already pushed past that boundary.
Yeah. It's an interesting, I guess it just depends on what, like, many people would look at me, my mom, hey, are you listening? And would say I don't have boundaries. However, I would argue that point because it's just a matter of how you look at what boundaries, what's defined as a boundary. I do think there's an element, I agree with you, where however you define the boundary of you it shows you care. Yeah. And kids want that. They want you to care about what they're doing. They want you to care. We want people to care
about us.
We're all the
very
same.
Caring.
Yeah.
Care Bears here. No.
Well, I mean, even as adults, like, we want people to care about us and care about what we're doing, and so.
Yeah, and also too, I think in that when kids do cross those boundaries that have been set up, it's most likely because they're trying to push it, or maybe they're exploring,
yeah,
or they're in their own way asking for attention, or like, hey, like something's out of place and they don't know how to get it, or maybe don't know how to express it, their desires. Having those boundaries, then you'd be like, okay, he's been really pushing my boundaries lately. What's going on? Is he trying to express himself?
And also with that, I do feel it's a good thing to also explore if a child is pushing a certain boundary a lot. Where can you potentially, is that a boundary that really needs to be there?
That's a good question.
Maybe it could be softened a little bit, because sometimes I do feel that we get so much as maybe not so much nowadays, but there is this sense of, I'm the parent, you're the child. And, well, okay, why is that boundary there?
Yeah.
I think coming back to it, why is that boundary there? Is it to show your authoritative place in the family, or is it to protect the child and to foster ultimately love?
Right. So. I'm not so great on that aspect of it. It's interesting. One thing I learned about my parenting styles, I'm not great at following through with like punishments, like, I'm going to take this from you or whatever. And through that, I've like really learned like for my own boundaries, and for getting boundaries for my son where he feels safe in, by like claiming like, I'm going to take your iPad for 2 days and then not following through.
I haven't had to use those threats in some
way.
Yeah. Most of the time I'm just, it's more of, hey, if you do that and it falls, it will break. And if it breaks, it's gone.
All done.
Just kind
we're
of
done.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think realizing where my boundaries lie and being able to set those up for him, and then realizing like, okay, so don't take things away from him in any form of long term, because it doesn't give safe boundaries for him, and it's actually not really respecting my own, which is, that's not a boundary that's important to me to have things taken, but what is important is following through with what I say. And so by not doing that, I need to step back and be like, okay, we're not going to take anything from you. But an important boundary is like making sure that I follow through with what I say. And that might just mean I take a step back. And yeah.
Choices, that's something that we do often, less than the taking away. It's, you can have this or you can have this.
Yeah.
So which one?
Those are good.
Yeah,
for sure.
You can do one of the two.
Yeah.
Sometimes that helps with the
boundaries. Yeah.
Anyway, well, it's a never-ending topic of boundaries and desires, and hopefully you got some glimpse of wisdom out of this
One more thing before we go here. So kind of going back, like, how did you balance your desires as a new parent? Because I think that's such a hard, really finding that balance, because, really ultimately you're in charge of feeding the baby and taking care of everything. Like, just real quick, how did you express your desires as a new parent?
Through nighttime rage. No.
Through nighttime rage.
So expressing desires as a parent, I think there's a really big element of your desires are really shifting. And even what I thought were my desires, after months I realized actually this isn't my desire. And your desires are very quickly changing.
Yeah. So accept the changing of desires.
Yeah. After giving birth. But when you can build in those times, and I think writing them out if possible, again, setting a time every week, if you can build it into your rhythm, to set some time, even if it's just 5 or 10 minutes, and just think, what am I desiring most right now?
Mm-hmm.
And
why?
And having someone to talk to about that or help you through that, whether that's a postpartum doula or a coach. I mean, I work with people to try to help them integrate, right? And look at this stuff. Your partner, a trusted friend, and it can be as simple as going on a walk with a friend once every couple weeks. Even just through talking to somebody, it's like therapy.
Yeah.
You can really kind of see where you're at and what you're truly desiring. Yeah, communicating it that's the thing, is I feel like once you can define what it is, the communication part isn't so hard. It's just a matter of taking time to really define what you need. Because once you know, like, this week is, like, this is what I actually need right now, that can be easy to, like, just in a non-charged way come and say to your family or your partner, I need 2 hours this week to go get a massage or whatever it is. Yeah.
Sit down and do nothing.
Yeah.
Take it out.
So, yeah.
Cool.
Did you have any final thoughts on that?
No, like, I don't really think how I got my desires met, I would say. I think I kind of touched on it before, which is just taking time. So.
And if it's early enough on, there's always ways you can do it while you're breastfeeding. You can just decide, my morning breastfeed this morning, I'm going to close my eyes and just really think about what I'm desiring. You can decide during the first nap of the day. As soon as they go down, I'm just going to do a 5-minute meditation and then just sit for 5 minutes and reflect on, like, what comes up as far as what I'm wanting.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. Perfect.
All right. Desires and boundaries. Tell us some of yours.
Hey there, amazing listeners. We just want to say a huge thank you for tuning into our convo on the Just This podcast today. We appreciate each and every one of our listeners, and your continued support means the world to us.
If you enjoyed this episode and found value in it, we would be incredibly grateful if you could take a moment to leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform or share this episode with someone you think would enjoy it too. Your reviews and shares not only motivate us, but they also help others discover our show.
We're also all about keeping the conversation going and hanging out with our incredible community. Head over to justthis.site, that's justhis.site, where you'll find additional resources, ways to connect with us, and join the conversation, plus some more goodies.
Thank you again for being a part of the Just This community. We'll be back soon. Until next time, remember to take care of yourself and embrace the wonder as you navigate this extraordinary adventure.